I do want to welcome you all to our Careers in Peacebuilding Talk Story series. It has been truly a wonderful journey putting these together, just being able to bring on a lot of wonderful speakers from all different walks of life and parts of the world and various age groups as well. So I think it's a big highlight of spotlighting how we can all be peace builders and create social change in so many different ways. And so I hope you will be able to take something away from today's event as we move along and be able to make some connection, because I think that's really what's essential at the end of the day here. So without further ado, welcome to our Careers in Peacebuilding Talk Story series. My name is José Barzola from the Mount Sinai Institute for Peace at the University of Hawai'i at Manoa. Our talk story today will focus on the intersection of peace building and storytelling with Sean Dunnington. Thank you for joining us to learn about a journey into the profession, which some people may not even consider a profession. It's more of a passion and it's life. Our special guest today is Sean, who is an Ashkenazi queer playwright, geographer, and civic artist living between Brooklyn and Honolulu. His stories have been produced and presented off-Broadway in regional theaters across the country, local libraries and galleries, state museums, old attics, public radio stations, film festivals, and LGBTQIA plus centers. He's been in residence with the East West Center, Waiwai Collective, Unruly Collective, and the University of Hawai'i Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation Campus Center, and he's been a fellow with Creative Labs in Hawaii and the California Arts Council. Sean believes in democratizing storytelling, so he leads free writing workshops and story circles for nonprofits, public schools, and community centers. He currently is pursuing his MFA in dramatic writing from NYU Tisch School of Arts. So I believe he is starting school shortly, or has started. So to get us started, I'm going to turn it over to him, and we'll be moving back and forth as we move along today. So welcome, Sean.
Thank you. And apologies, Jose, that you had to read that all out loud.
No.
To me, it's more meant for the eyes and the ears.
I want photos of those old attics where your work has been in.
Oh, I have them. I've had my plays done in very when no one wants to do your play, sometimes you have to do it yourself. And I've had that instance many times. So I've done them in cafes, I've done them in like backyards, I've done them in the woods.
We need to find new ground. Have you done them in alleys by any chance? You are in New York now, so there's not.
You have an alley for me?
We'll talk later.
Okay. Well, thank you for introducing me, and hello everyone, aloha kako. Even though I can't see any of you, I assume that you're all there and eagerly listening. And to those on all of the streaming platforms, hello. So I guess let me start by throwing it out there that I am, while I am a quote unquote, I would have considered myself maybe a professional storyteller, but now I'm a student again. So when is one professional? I get paid for it. Does that make me a professional? I don't know. I do start school Monday, and I did pay them today to do that. So maybe they're the professionals and I'm the consumer. I don't know. But I am not a professional peace builder, but it is something I'm very passionate about. I've done work with like peace building organizations. I'm a trained mediator. I've done a lot of work in restorative justice, especially in work that centers anti-oppression, anti-racism, DEIA, all those hot terms that sometimes we can lose ourselves in and that can carry no meaning in some places or a lot in others. But what excites me about this kind of work, also, I'll start by saying, well, I already started, but I'll say, I don't have a visual presentation because this, I don't know, that felt very like schooly to me, and I just wanted to talk, and I hope people talk back to me eventually. If there's real people behind those screens and they're not just bots that Jose programmed to make it look like people came. But I'll say what really excites me about this work is, for me as a playwright, this medium storytelling is so centered in connection and building a relationship between the storyteller and the listener, the person speaking, the person listening. And I think that inherently builds a connection. It isn't necessarily one centered in peace, but it is certainly one centered in mutual understanding, and the understanding of getting to know one another. So there's a quote I want to start with that I think about constantly from my mentor, Lloyd Suh, who's a playwright I love and adore in New York. Well, actually, he lives in New Jersey. And the quote is, it's from his play, The Chinese Lady. And this is a little bit of a spoiler because this is one of the last lines of the play, but that's okay. It is a beautiful thing to look at something long enough to really understand it. But it is so much more beautiful to be looked at long enough to be understood. I'm going to say it one more time just because it's a lot of words. And also, you know what? I'm going to put it in the chat because I wrote it down just in case to make sure I didn't forget it. So it is a beautiful thing to look at something long enough to really understand it. But it is so much more beautiful to be looked at long enough to be understood. And what this quote makes me think about is, you know, the very human basic nature of wanting to feel seen and heard, right? And that there's something about storytelling, especially about nonfiction storytelling from a place of truth, when we really get to share who we are, that I think breaks down just the most silly barriers that we put up daily without even realizing. I've had the privilege I was born in New York, and my family moved to the Big Island in Waimea when I was in elementary school, when I was going into 5th grade. So I was raised on the Big Island. And when I was working in Honolulu, I had the privilege of getting to work across different organizations and host a wide series of writing workshops. And in these workshops, I encountered a really heartbreaking amount of both young students, children, and also some folks who are, you know, are my aunties and uncles, and that all consider themselves, you know, not worthy of being storytellers, or not having the right tools or education or training to be storytellers. You know, that's something that's meant for people that have like higher degrees, or that's something that's meant for people that have like a really like, you know, high vocabulary, or consider for people that have like, you know, been produced or it's their profession. But the thing about storytelling is that, you know, it's something that we all participate in daily. You know, it's not something that is excluded. It's something maybe that is excluded in who gets paid for it, but it's certainly not something that is that is not accessible to anyone to, you know, participate in. And that's the thing that I love about playwriting, is playwriting is just you know, it's just speaking and listening, and we all do it every day. You know, like if you just recorded your conversations for a day and then transcribed it onto a page, that's a play. You know, like we all are practitioners in storytelling. So, you know, if we are sharing this understanding that we're all already storytellers in our own way, then where does peace come into play? How do we use storytelling to build peace amongst one another? Or, you know, sometimes how do we use storytelling to tear each other apart and, you know, bring ourselves further away from each other? How does perspective and how does plot and all of that, you know, play into it? So that's what I'm hoping to get into. So before I start my little thoughts on all of this, is it too early, Jose, to ask if there's any questions, since I haven't even really started yet?
It never is. It's always a good time.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions about anything, about me, about you? I don't know, about each other before we start
I have
this
a
next
quick question.
Yeah.
Sorry, my camera doesn't work, but is there a place online where we can see your work?
Yeah, of course. I'll just attach a little, oh God, did I disappear? I'll attach something to the link. I have so I mostly do playwriting. So most of my things happen in person, but I have recordings of things, and I have a film in the works right now that's in post-production that's going to be released in Honolulu next year, et cetera, et cetera. But yes, there is places you can see my stuff. Thank you for asking.
I have a question.
I need a website. Yes.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to listening to this, Sean. And I have a question. The question is, how do you help those people who have gone into hiding with their emotions to bring out their story? And a second part of that question you can share with maybe later is just if you've had to deal with people who are more like left brain oriented rather than right brain oriented, and so they're telling their story might be a little bit different, but I'm sure if you could just touch on that during the presentation, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So what I'm hearing is, what I'm hearing you ask is how do I convince folks to engage in storytelling or telling their stories that might feel distant from it or feel like they can't do it? And also, how do folks that feel that they may be more like analytical versus creative, how do they express their stories? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, that's perfect, Sean. You told it better. You asked the question better than I did. Thank you.
I'm just making sure I understand it. Sure. Yeah, I can touch on that before I get started. So in my workshops, a big part of what I do is making sure to lead by example. Not asking anyone to do something that I won't. There's a lot of requirements in contemporary storytelling that I don't really like, and I'm trying to break away from. One of them is the kind of cliche which I guess isn't contemporary, it's old-fashioned in my mind, is that you have to suffer for your art. That to be able to tell a story, you need to bleed, and it needs to hurt, and it needs to come from a place that is so vulnerable and in the shadows that, like, when you bring it out to the light, it just crumbles into pieces in front of everyone, you along with it. And I don't like that for the most obvious reason, which is who said that and why? And also, I want to sustain this practice, and no one should have to be in active pain to share who they are. Sharing who you are should also be able to be healing and restorative and feel powerful. So when I am, and I guess I actually can relate this to my thoughts on what I wanted to share. So when I'm asking people to share their stories, there's kind of three touchstones that I always return to. And these are actually touchstones that I took away from when I went to acting school. They didn't really express it like this, but it's the way that I understand it, which is intention, 1, listening, 2, and plasticity, 3. And I'll go through each of those. So I'll start with intention. When, let's say you're on stage with someone and you're saying a line, it's important in my mind to mean what you say. There's a difference between meaning what you say and believing what you say. If you're on stage and you're talking about like wanting to like throw someone off the roof, you should mean it, but you shouldn't believe it. Because if you believe it, then someone else is going to have to get involved to stop you. But we are all capable of knowing what it really means to mean what you say, because that matters to you. So if I were to say to Jose, and if I were to be like, Jose, I really need you to listen to me right now. I could say it just empty words without intention behind it. And this is why the word that I'm using is intention. I could go like, Jose, I really need you to listen to me right now. Jose, I really need you to listen to me right now. Jose, I need you to listen to me right now. They're words, they're coming out of my mouth, but behind it, I don't have the intention that I mean it. So if I were, and that doesn't mean that you need to speak directly. It's really simple, actually, and it sounds kind of strange, but if I were to just say, Jose, I really need you to listen to me right now, I mean it and I feel it. And in that, I would hope that Jose feels it too. But what matters is that I mean it. So when I'm asking people to share their stories, I'm going to ask them to mean what they write, to lean into that discomfort of it's okay for a moment that doesn't feel important or that you might not really care about, to at least explore the intention of it, like to say like, this made me upset. You know, like mean it, like this made me upset and why, and go into that. So if you're on stage and you're talking to someone to mean what you say, then sorry, that's that whole point. The second point is listening. You can tell when someone's not listening to you on stage, in life, anywhere. You know, we're all very capable of it. It's so easy to not listen to someone. And if, you know, a big part of me in storytelling is if people are going to A, pay me to listen to my story, and B, give me their time, then I got to give them something that they really do want to listen to, or at least feel like they should listen to. So, and I feel the same way, you know, and I think about this all the time. Like, I'm living in New York now, and people are always talking to me. I have no idea who they are. Just like random people are always coming up to me and telling me their story. And I'm realizing if I listen to what they have to say, then I'm not wasting my time or their time, you know? I'm making that a moment where they can really share a piece of themselves with me, and I'm taking it in. And I'm becoming a bearer of their story in a way. I don't need to tell their story back to bear it, but I am at least holding it for them in a way that is meaningful to me and that is meaningful to them. Even if I don't relate to it, if it has nothing to do with me, if it feels totally out of my realm of understanding, just to really listen to someone, I think is a really beautiful thing. And I think that's a part of being understood, is really being able to listen to one another. And then the third one is plasticity. And I actually got that from a mentor of mine. Her name's Paula Vogel, and she's one of my favorite playwrights. And the idea of plasticity is that, like plastic, our stories are so malleable and can mold with just like, you know, like a whisper, like can just like blow your story into pieces. So being flexible and letting your story change and letting your feelings towards it change is really important. So when I'm in this work, when I'm in the room with someone and they're like, oh, like my story doesn't, like, you know, there's someone who I really adore that I was working with at the East West Center, and she was in her mid 70s. And when we started our first workshop, she said, oh, I have nothing to say. Like, you have all the interesting stories. There's nothing from me. And for me, I'm like, oh my God, you have nothing to say. Like almost 3 times my age. How do you have nothing to say? If you have nothing to say, then I have like less than nothing to say. Because of course you have something to say. You have an entire life. What do you mean you have nothing to say? So I think just what I encourage someone to do is I give them a prompt, and I'll first lead by example. So I'll ask a prompt like, share a story of a time where you wanted to feel seen or heard, and you were. You know, I encourage all of you right now, think about a moment in your life, any moment where you wanted to feel seen or heard, and you were. This is kind of the positive spin storytelling that I took away from my work with University of Hawai'i Manoa's Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation Center. A lot of these are from Punihei Life. She inspired many of the questions that I ask. And so if I were to share a story, I would say, okay, a time where I wanted to be listened to and I was heard. The first thing that comes to mind, and I'm going to try to offer myself a non-judgmental space to just let things drift in and out, is when I was in high school on the Big Island in little tiny rural Waimea with all of our cows. I was one of the first people, if not the first person to ever come out as gay in the school's history, which is what one of the teachers told me. And in my coming out process, I faced a lot of resistance, which was not surprising for the time. It's unfortunate, but you know, it's true. It's just how it's been rolling out, as tale as old as time. And there was one time where I was called into our, let's say, like disciplinary office. And I was told that while it is okay for me to be gay, it is not okay for me to, like, quote unquote, rub it in someone's face by talking about it. It's not okay to display it in a way that makes people, you know, have to think about it. That isn't what was said, but that's what I took away from it. And in that moment, I was really hurt. And I recognize, even though I was only 15, that there was something wrong with that statement. And in that moment, I said back, I really disagree with this. And I don't think that's right. And I think I should be able to be myself. And I was listened to, but I was not heard in that moment. And so that's a moment that really sticks with me as a place where I wasn't able to, use all these tools that we're talking about to build peace, because there was a resistance. Perhaps I wasn't actually listened to, because, if you really listen to someone where they're really coming from, if you're able to flip perspective and do what we do in acting, which is I'm going to use imaginary circumstances to put myself in your shoes. Like, let's say I'm playing like an old man in like the 17th century in France, and like I want like to end like a war or something. I don't know. I have no idea. How am I ever supposed to know what that's like? Like, come on. No one would ever know what that's like. But I'm going to imagine, what places can I relate to? What can I imagine? Like, what places in my life can I imagine? Like, what conflict have I wanted to end? Where can I imagine like what it means to really feel like an ownership of something, or feel like to really like care about something? And then how can I apply that to myself and then speak those lines with that in mind? So I would ask, so this is all to say, that was a moment where I was not listened to. So that's kind of in contrary to the point that I'm trying to make. Another moment that comes to mind of a moment that I wanted to be listened to and I was heard is the story of, let's say, oh God, I'm thinking about who's watching this and what can I say? I'm gonna say was when I was in a conflict. Yes. Let's say I was in a conflict with my sister. Okay. Sorry, Marina. And details aside, I was able to tell her that there was this moment that just like devastated me and crushed me. And I really needed to be listened to in that moment. Like I really needed it more than anything. Because it wasn't just the saying of it, it wasn't just the words coming out of my mouth, it was the receiving of them. And to feel listened to feel understood, to feel seen. And her just saying the most simple words of, I hear you. And to validate that, that me spilling out my heart was worthwhile, to get her to see me as I was feeling that moment. That made it enough, and that felt really healing for us. And what we do in peace building, what we do in conversation is we share our stories with one another so that we can better understand each other. So, thinking about the intersection of peace building and storytelling, it almost seems, I am almost thinking the intersection is peace building and storytelling, that they are always intersecting. They can't be one without the other. But I guess there are instances where I'm sure we've all heard a story where we felt that we felt distanced by it, or we felt like isolated by it, or we felt like we connected to it so much it made us want to run away. But that's a later point. So then to tie that point, what I would say is, if someone is like, I don't know what to tell, I would be like, well, here's my story. Now, what I'm going to challenge you to do is don't add any pressure to it and just talk, just talk like you would any day. Like, you have something. It doesn't have to, be like the most monumental thing in the world. I'm not, I'm not trying to get you to win an Oscar here. Just tell me like what's up, or write about it. And, just giving yourself the space and time to even think about a moment in your life and write it on the page, or, to do something as sacred as share it out loud with someone else and have them listen to you. I think that unlocks something. And I think that's really universal. And I think it sounds cliche and it sounds hokey, but I think it's so cliche because it's true. And then the second thing I would say is I've worked with a fair amount of researchers who are very rooted in the sciences. A lot of the work I did with the East West Center was with researchers. And, I would say everything comes back to story, including the research that we're doing. What is, we're all trying to tell a story of something. And it's important for me in those kind of conversations. I try not to, sometimes I'll do like, here's storytelling tools and like, here's what we could use to like kind of quote unquote better our stories or make them stronger. But what I think about is like, where is the personal connection you know, like there's so much that we could be thinking about and doing with our time. So like, what is it about wanting to do yada yada? What is it about that connects to you? And where is your story in this? There's a thing I've been thinking about a lot lately, which is, it's a quote by someone, oh God, terrible that I don't know, but it's something along the lines of like, love yourself, love the art in yourself and not yourself in the arts. And I think the same thing about stories, like love the story in yourself and not yourself in the story, you know, like so there's the aspect of storytelling where it's being shared, it's being received, and that's doing something active to you and another person. But then there's the internal part. What is telling your story doing to you? And, you know, I just am beginning my graduate school. I had to write a lot of artistic statements. And, you know, if you're doing a lot of grants and applications, oh, thank you. Yes, Stanislavski. Jose, did you know that from, did you look it up or did you just know that?
Oh, I looked it up.
Did I get the quote right?
I do not have a wealth of theater knowledge like you do, but he's a Russian theater practitioner. So that is why you probably have such knowledge of him.
Yes, yes, I studied Stanislavski and Uta Hagen and Meisner and all those acting people. Yes, and that is a quote I like. And you know, it makes me think about in these applications I've been talking so much about like myself in the art and like how I want to change the world with my stories and how I want to reframe queer existence. But, you know, if I really think about it, why am I doing that? And then I thought about this the other day, actually, and I was thinking, well, I feel like when I'm writing, it's healing to me and it's healing to my experience. It takes all this trauma in my head and it takes all these kind of discombobulated memories and it organizes them in a way that I can see it and I can recognize it and I can own it. And that's the biggest principle that I always tell people is I don't care really what your story is. I don't care how powerful you think it is. I don't care if there's drama in it. I don't care if it was loud or if it was quiet. I care about if you own your story, you know, and we all have it. And once you feel like you can really own your story and you can claim it, I think that's when you're able to share it in a way that's really meaningful to others. Or sometimes you own it by the action of sharing. You know, sometimes you need to share it out loud, to release it, to depart from it, to have that kind of special relationship with it. I see, and that's my point with that. I see a hand raised. Yes, I'm taking all questions at any time.
All right, thanks, Sean. Thanks for making it so informal. Appreciate that. I love what you just said. Love yourself in the story and not the story in yourself, because I've been guilty of loving my story in myself. And then I go around telling the story and the story stays the same. It hasn't changed from one day. It hasn't changed from like 10 years or 20 years ago. It's the same story. But if I actually love myself in the story, then it goes back to what you talked about, where its plasticity comes in. The plasticity comes in because then it's a moving, living organism that's kind of has its own way of finding its way to find some resolution. That's amazing. That's just amazing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You know, it's all semantics. It feels like a weird riddle, this thing, but I think it is important to think about, is there a story? And I think about this daily. Maybe let me know if any of you relate to this. Let's say like something just happened to you. It's kind of like crazy and out there. And you're like, oh my God, I have to tell someone this. And then you tell someone and it's like the first time you're saying it and it's like, whoa. And then you're like, I'm going to tell someone else. And then you tell it again. And then you're like, okay, yeah, like I get it. And then you tell it again, and then you tell it again, and you tell it again. And there's almost a point to which, for me, I start scripting this like monologue of a story without even realizing it. And then there's a point where I'm not really meaning it anymore. You know, I'm kind of just telling it. You know, it's almost like a recording that is coming out of me passively. So then I challenge myself all the time when I'm talking to someone or telling a story, and I'm like, okay, how can I think about this in a way, or like reframe this in a way that is meaningful to me? Does anyone relate to that? Is that something that anyone, that feeling of just you start kind of getting in the groove of telling something and blah blah blah. Okay, well that's me going on a that doesn't matter.
No,
No, it's true.
Oh, go ahead, Raj.
I was just gonna say it's true. I've told the story a few times, and I remember my dad telling me, he said, "Aren't you getting tired of the same story, telling the same story over and over?" And it hasn't really had any movement. But I think that goes back to what you said too, really being listened to and feeling listened to, because when you feel listened to and you feel like you got that aha moment, then you can go on to the next whatever the next thing is. But it's like there's some closure around it. Also, Sean, I love what you said early in the beginning. But I have the sign on this wall here. I'm staying at my I'm in Dallas, and I'm staying at my niece's place, and she's got a little plaque on the wall that says, "You had me at hello." Right when you started. So right when you started, you said peace building and storytelling. And I got to thinking about that. Peace building, facts, and storytelling about feelings. So if you combine facts and feelings together, you get that left brain, right brain connection going on. And so I just, that peace building, like you said, peace building, storytelling, that intersection is so huge. And really, everything that we come across will have that left brain, right brain component. The feelings, how to tell the story and to be seen and be heard, but then have the navigational tools to move through the process. So then that's kind of left brain kicks in. Anyway, I'm taking so many notes. But
Oh,
thank
well,
you.
I'm glad
Keep
I'm glad
going.
you're I'm glad it's resonating. This is all making me think about a question I have for all of you, which is maybe something to think about on your own is there ever a story that someone told you that left a lasting impact? I would assume yes. And maybe nothing's coming to mind, but throughout the rest of these next 20 plus minutes, think about it. And maybe we'll come to that at the end, is think about just like, a story someone once told you. It could be casual, or it could be something that even something that you saw like on stage or over a screen, and why did it last an impact on you? And that makes me think about this idea of mutual understanding. So one exercise, and it's my absolute favorite exercise to do, is put two people together. I recently did a workshop at HISAM, the Hawaii State Art Museum. I think that's what it stands for, right? And I was doing this like queer storytelling healing circle workshop thing. And what I did is I paired people together, and I would be like, okay, here's a prompt, share a story, blah, blah, blah. And then someone would share their story, and the other person would listen, but they would really have to listen, because what they would do back is share the story that they just heard in first person, as if it was their story. And that's kind of, to me, like the ultimate practice of trying to bear someone else's story. But I think that's the most extreme version. I think a part of it is if someone tells you their story and you're just talking about it later to someone else, what does it mean to carry intention? What does it mean to hold the value of the story that someone else gave to you? So I think about the work I've been doing this past year with Dream House, a really beautiful charter school near Eva. And a lot of the students there, when I asked, like, raise your hand if you think that you want to be a storyteller one day, like one student raised their hand. And I attest that to the idea that storytelling is like super fancy and professional and like a money industry, and it's not. Like, it's so not. I really want to emphasize that. That's why Jose was reading in my little blurb I wrote. I really believe in the democratization of storytelling, and really just like restoring the truth that we are all storytellers and have the right to share our stories with at any point. But I think about how can these kids, these students, share their stories with one another in a way that is unpretentious, in a way that helps them build relationships or further their relationships in ways that they may not know that they're capable of. And I think a part of that comes from really just being able to share your lived experience. There's a really big expression in writing that maybe you've all heard, which is just write what you know. And that's all we can do. I can't write what I don't know because I don't know it, you know? Even if I write something that sometimes I write what I want to know, you know? Like if a lot of the plays I write, I'm not writing, like my characters aren't named Sean and they're not in Honolulu. My characters' names are whatever else, and they're wherever else. And it's, you know, that's an offshoot of my life. It's filled with what I know, but I really want to explore what I don't know. And I guess that's to say, when you're sharing your story with someone, there's an aspect of sharing, you know, a piece of your life. And that can be a really tall order, you know, especially when you're getting into stories about identity or stories about vulnerable topics like loss or sorrow or jealousy or really any basic feeling. And, you know, I think about these kids, and when I would go in, I would lead by example and be like, this is my story. And I always, in spaces, I try to lead with a story about identity and lay it all on the table. And I start with my queer identity a lot because it's important to me to kind of open up that space and allow those who identify in that realm to connect with me, and those who don't connect with me or don't connect with that, or maybe even those who disdain that, to hear me, you know? And I've had so many instances in my life, and maybe some of you have felt this, like thinking about your own identities, where I would share my story and to someone who has like a completely dichotomous lived experience. And that might be their first time hearing someone speak from that perspective. And that builds understanding. Now, is it my job to get someone who may hate gay people to understand a gay perspective? No, absolutely not. But if I'm trying to build peace with someone that I want to build peace with, you know, someone that I care about, someone that I want to care about, then I think that's just a basic part of human connection, is sharing your story with one another so you can understand each other. It doesn't even have to be something as big as that, you know? Sometimes we'll slip in stories of a difficulty that we've had in the past. Or, you know, sometimes you hit a milestone, like a personal milestone in a relationship where you're like, you share something that's kind of vulnerable to you. There's that in itself is building peace, for lack of a better word. I mean, you know, a part of me thinks, what is that? I don't even know, like, what does that mean, peace building, right? What does it even mean to build peace versus understanding? And and Jose, I'm curious if you can speak on that. What do you see the differences between mutual understanding and peace building?
Thank you for turning things around. I gotta say, everything you're saying is resonating so much. I greatly appreciate you, and I so many times want to interject, but I also don't want to lose the vibe you're on. You're on like this wavelength as a storyteller yourself. So, but getting back to your question, or a couple different questions that you kind of proposed. So I'll start with peace building. What does it mean to me? It means relationship building. That's how I define it. And what I then go with the next, when I talk to people or classes, is think about what are the skills that you need to create those healthy, positive relationships in your life. You know, think about those great relationships you have or have had. What made it so special? And so some of the things that come up are exactly what you've been talking about: active listening, you know, reframing, trust. And so when we're talking about, you know, the intersections of peace building and storytelling, I think like it's relationship building, like such great power to tell stories. You asked about understanding peace. I don't think I could ever say I understand peace or any concept altogether, because I always know that there's so much more out there, and I wouldn't want to ever be known as the go-to person that knows something, just because I know there's so much more. And that's the beauty of life, that we continuously, you know, keep evolving, and more tools to the toolkit, as they say. In this case, more stories to your toolkit. And I think there is great power in, you know, just looking at different aspects of my life. Like when I was an academic advisor, specifically, I would start, yes, there's like the typical, what classes you should take and so forth, but you want to build a relationship, get to know the student that you're meeting. Oh, where are you from? Oh, what? And so I would find things of connection of, oh, food. I've tried that, cultural food, or I also happen to have struggled academically, or so through storytelling, I was able to build relationships and be able to create trust with those the people I came across. And I think the fact that people approach you and tell you their stories, I think is beautiful. And it is a big honor to have, I imagine, for yourself, just because you give off a vibe that you're a good active listener. That's really what it kind of comes down to. And because I've simultaneously, I've had that experience at times, and it happened, and I feel like it's generational in the family as I look at it, and in the stories we carry, and but what I look at it is I should share this with somebody that even if it's whoever it may be, I then share that story if obviously if it's okay to share it, because I think that's the power of storytelling, being able to carrying it on and make sure it doesn't end with you. And so yeah, anyways, I can do a whole event separately, but please, I want to turn it over to you or anybody else in the audience that wants to share about, we have mutual understanding versus peace building. Raju posted that in the chat.
I think that's a reminder of what I asked.
Oh, got it.
Thank you, Jose. I have to really remind I try to listen, probably like everyone else, I have lots of moments where someone's talking to me and I'm just totally dissociating. And then I think, oh my God, like how inconsiderate of me, that someone's like using their time to share something with me, and my ears are walled off to them. So it that's why the word is actively listen, right? Because it is an active thing, it can be hard to listen, especially if someone says something that you disagree with, which is what makes me think of peace building is, and there's two thoughts surfacing. One is what's really interesting about this concept of peace and storytelling is that storytelling all centers around conflict. Like that's the idea of a great story in terms of like the dramatic arts, is like a play needs conflict. Like the question is, where's the conflict? There always needs to be conflict. If we just have characters that are all hunky-dory getting along, then there's no story, right? And the story doesn't always end with them, finding peace or finding resolution. My high school English teacher, Mr. Naj, if you're listening, told me that closure isn't real. And I've believed him ever since. So, a part of me thinks like, a part of me thinks like, where in exploring conflict, how can you find peace? Where are there moments for peace? In a story, in a dramatic arc, we always have the climax. A lot of people will think of the climax as the most intense part of the story, the most interesting part of the story. But I really don't think that's true. To me, a climax is the point of no return, the point where nothing can ever be the same again. This can be quiet. This can be loud. This can happen a few times. And this can be negative or it can be positive. Something can change and it can change for the better. Something can change and it can change for the worse. So, storytelling like peace is such a general term, like, are we thinking of storytelling like storytelling in like the art, like, like telling a story, like a big grand story with words? Are we thinking about like talk story, just casual chatting? Are we thinking about telling like an intentional story? Is just trying to get your point across and sharing your feelings? Is that a story? Is that the story of who you are? Because, like I'm thinking back to like some of my exes, and I'm thinking like of all the moments where I wanted to be heard and I wasn't, but I wasn't really telling them stories. I was just saying how I felt. Is that a story? If I connected it to my traumatic childhood, would that make it a story? So that's all to say, these big forms of peace and story, they are very, I think, non-exclusive and applicable to so many parts of our lives. And I don't think there's anything useful about me trying to really boil it down to like, what is the story and what is like the piece and where do they come together? Because I think they are constantly ebbing and flowing with each other. in the same way that conflict is ebbing and flowing with story. And, you know, like people have like, you know, I'm trying to think, is there an example of a story someone's told me that made me feel distance from them? And I wanted to say yes. I think I started this conversation by saying yes, but I think the answer might be no. Because even if someone told me a story in a way where they were explaining something that I disagree with, they're still taking, there's a difference from telling a story and making a point. They're sharing, like if someone was telling me a story about like explaining why they like, you know, didn't like a thing that I really like, what they're doing is they're taking the time to explain it to me so I can see that. And I like that, you know, I might not like what they're saying, but I like that they're owning it, which is the whole point that I'm making. I like that they are using story as a tool to bridge understanding with me. And in doing that, there is a concept or feeling of peace in a way. You know, maybe it exacerbates us, but I think there's something about sharing story that is so intentional that irregardless, it does bridge enough to make what I might consider peace happen. The most long-winded way I can say it. Okay, that's really everything I plan on saying. So we got time. I see Jose unmuted. If anyone has questions or points, let's hear it. What do you got, Jose?
Oh, I mean, I was just reflecting back on, and I'm always like, when I hear certain things and it just sticks, and feel like there's a challenge of like, you talk about, you know, there has to be conflict for there to be a story. And I'm like, can there be a story without conflict though? And I was reverted back to, you know, we teach about positive and negative peace. Because whenever I ask people like, what does peace mean to them? Many times I get the absence of conflict, you know, no war. And that is a very negative peace perspective. Well, when we talk about, you know, the presence of social justice and equality and actionable, that's positive peace right there. And so in the same perspective, I'm trying to think if storytelling can be actionable. I mean, I think it can, but can it exist without a conflict? And yeah, I know there's been lots of philosophers way before me that have been like, nope, it has to exist with conflict. But I was just kind of stuck on that for a little bit. But
well, they're kind of together, you know, like,
yeah.
I don't think you can have, I think in the same, I don't like, what is peace without conflict, right? Right? Like, is there peace without conflict? Or
and I think it's part of human nature. You're attracted to, you know, you look at the news and they're never telling like happy stories. It's always something that has been controversial because that's what will get the ratings, what will get people watching. So it also, a lot of what you've been talking about reminds me of, a quote that we always utilize here is that if you want peace, you must educate people to want peace, which Senator Matsunaga, who we're named after, wrote in his first semester of college as part of a speech where he was really more trying to, the further portion of his talk was about how we honor and take pride and, you know, put on a pedestal people going to war, but we do not do the same when it comes to peace. We're never like, oh, look at that person doing that peace work. That's amazing. And simultaneously, I'm thinking like, I do see in certain cultures, communities, we honor storytellers. Like, but once more, you're saying like, it's not a grand luxury to, and everyone is a storyteller, but not everyone feels comfortable, I think, in sharing their story. And it's possible maybe because they may have not been heard, or maybe they just were never given the platform for it. And so you only get these select people who are storytellers who maybe have risen within the community, the elders, or got an Oscar, or you know, one of the big awards that signifies that you can tell stories. So I guess, how do we elevate those voices that are not being elevated? Do you have any tips for, you know, the people?
Yeah, I would say, you know, because the last thing I want is like, the only way that you feel like you can be comfortable with storytelling is like go into a space where someone tells you to do it. I think for anyone, I would say to, I think the first step is find, well, if the idea is how can anyone encourage someone else to connect with their inner storytelling self, I would say always lead by example. You know, never ask someone to do something that you can't do yourself or wouldn't do. So, you know, share your story and share it with these touchstones, with intention, with a listening ear, and with plasticity. And then you know, never, I think we sometimes expect people to just share themselves. And we expect there to be immediate trust sometimes, or people to put themselves on display. And I would say asking with intention, you know, thinking, considering what, you know, like, because there should be nothing to gain from listening to someone else's story aside from listening, you know, like, I think that, like, just having the gift to listen should be enough, you know, versus like, I want to hear their story because I want to be able to learn how to say this, or I want to hear their story because I want to be able to refute it. You know, if your intention is to hear someone's story so that you can, you know, unaffirm them, or is there a word that's the opposite of affirm? Defirm? I don't know. No, I bet there is. You know, like, it's all about meeting someone halfway, you know, like, if you want to be listened to, then you have to be willing to listen, right? And if someone else, and it should be the same vice versa. Yeah. Invalidate. Yeah, that's the right word. But yeah, I think, you know, like, everyone's got a story, and I think, and it's you know, like, it should, yeah, it just breaks my heart, you know, like, how many people, like, go their whole, like, there's so many folks I've worked with that have gone through most of their life without ever thinking that anyone wants to hear what they have to say, you know, or hearing what they've been through. That's really more what I'm thinking of, because hearing what you have to say, you know, like, you know, I don't want to end up with someone's, like, Trumpy uncle that's like, like, no one wants to hear what I have to say. And I would think, you know what, maybe that's true. But what I do think is, like, I want to hear what you, like, you know, I want to hear your story. I want to hear what brought you to this. You know, I want to hear, like, for you. I want to hear, like, the authentic you. And, you know, that doesn't mean I want to hear you, you know, share your biggest, most vulnerable treasures with me. I don't want to hear you, what's always asked of me as a playwright, to bleed out, you know, for your story to hurt you, to share with me. I want to hear the story that you own, you know. I want to hear what matters to you. I want to hear the story that matters to you. And, you know, it all starts to contradict itself at a point, you know, like, right when you think you start to get it, and you're like, but wait, what is the difference between blah, 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 blah. I'm going to try to not complicate it by asking those questions, because I'll just confuse myself. Does anyone else have any questions or anything? Leona, Michael, Heather,
I think Raj has his hand up.
Raj. Hello.
Yeah, go right ahead, Raj.
Thanks, guys. Great storytelling story. I was looking at the 1947 partition archive. You know, I'm Indian. My family came from Gujarat, and I was brought up in the West. But I heard this happen back in 1947, where India and Pakistan had split up, and 2 million people got killed. 20 million got displaced. So over the last few years, I've been wondering, why haven't I heard more stories about that? And then last year, I came across 1947 partitionarchive.org, Voices of Untold Stories. They've collected 10,500 testimonies now of people who had left India and went to Pakistan, or people who left Pakistan and went to India, and the grief and the hurts. And some of those people have actually been able to go back in virtual reality and see what their old homeland looked like. But what I noticed, Sean, was that as this place, Partition Archive, created a safe place for people to come tell their stories, people have been showing up. Like, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 people didn't want to tell a story, but then if they could see their associates and other people telling those stories, it gave them a little bit more courage to come forward. And so I just wanted to share that safe place, encouraging people having where they could have a safe place to tell their story. And then all these stories are actually archived, shared. There's value added to it. And it's put in such a way that people are able to access it. And the person who tells the story is validated.
Mm.
Mm.
I appreciate you sharing that, Raj. That you know, I think, yeah, oral history and oral history archives are a very important practice, and it makes. I've done a lot of work with as someone who's Jewish. I've done a lot of, well, it's not just because I'm Jewish. Like, not every Jew has to do this, but I've done work with oral history archives with survivors of the Holocaust, and for a lot of minorities or people outside of, you know, the majority, there is a really a very apparent history across identities where stories have been both suppressed or erased or hidden away, you know, because stories are so human. You know, when we're able to share a part of ourselves, we're able to share the truth of our lives. And that's why we have such a lack of stories and such a wide spectrum where we need them, you know. So I'm glad that that exists, and that's a place that you've been able to access. I'm seeing
Thank you, Sean.
yeah, I'm seeing another question. Why do you think people struggle to tell their stories? Is it because they are reluctant to share their past trauma? That's a great question. I think if there is past trauma, then it can be. But you know, I don't want to. I mean, I don't want to assume that everyone has past trauma. I do assume it always. But I will say, I think some people don't share their stories that I've worked. Sorry, I keep speaking over my air conditioner, and when it gets quiet, I start whispering. And I think maybe I've been screaming into the mic this whole time, but it just got quiet. I've worked with folks who don't share their stories because they think, I've heard people say, like, I'm not smart enough to share my story, you know, in a way that is compelling or interesting, or nothing big has happened in my life that's worth sharing compared to the movies I've seen. I think there's this idea that's been pushed down on us on what makes a good story. And you know, I can tell you like all the things I've learned of what makes an amazing story. But all I care about, that's why I said I don't care what your story's about. I just care that you own it, you know? Like, so I think that's really what it is. I think, you know, that's another thing. If someone has like trauma and they're not ready to share it, you know, I would never force someone to. I would never be like, no, like, you will tell me about this, because I'm not sure I would be able to do that myself. But I think if you are asking someone to share something that might be very sensitive, then bringing it back to, you need to be able to do that with them and lead by example, and not expect them to do the same, you know, because when you try to force a story or elicit a story out of someone, then it might not have that real intention of, you know, of just bare listening and that being enough. So that, I see we're at 5 o'clock my time. What time is it over there, Jose?
It's 11. Yes, we've reached the hour. So I want to just be conscientious of your time. But thank you so much. That was just, I mean, you talk about it's actually interesting what you brought up toward the end, just because, you know, we talk about relationships, and many times, you know, we talk about like opposites attract. And sometimes, although you may find things that you connect with, sometimes when it comes to storytelling, one person may be just more vocal than the other. And it's not that the other person doesn't want to be, it's just either they've never had the opportunity, or as you said, you know, felt as though they had something to share, or it's quite fascinating when they do open up. And, you know, you're like, I'm all ears, like, this is amazing, like, and what an honor it is. And so I think simultaneously, so sometimes we take it for granted when people just share their stories openly all the time. And so I think one thing that I'm taking away from this is just what an honor it is to get a story bestowed upon and to be able to carry it forward and Because I think that's the beauty of life, you know, and that's how, yes, you know, that's how things end up on books, and that's how things end up on multimedias, but it has to start somewhere. It has to start with some people having a dialogue and the power of dialogue. So thank you, Sean, for allowing us to learn about your work, the wealth of knowledge. It's really like, I imagine you didn't even consider it work. You're just like, this is my life, and what a beautiful life it is. So we appreciate you opening up about your experiences, lessons learned, and just today's dialogue was just very enriching. So thank you. And thank you for kindness leadership as we explore the journey into the profession. Last but not least, thank you everyone who joined today. We deeply appreciate your interest and support in joining us, and look forward to having you future Careers in Peace Building Talk Story series.